It says that you're the host now, Alex.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, it switched back.
Oh, it did. Alex, it looks like you are in charge now of the recording.
Hi, everyone. My name is Brianna. I'm also a student coordinator here at the STEP program. Thank you all for joining in on our talk this morning, and I really do hope you enjoy the content. I know I'm really excited to hear what Lizbeth has to say.
Thank you. All right. So now that you've met all of us and you met the team and you know why we're putting on this event, we're going to pass it on to Jasmine, who's going to introduce our amazing speaker.
Yeah, actually, before we get started with the introduction biography of Lizbeth, we're just going to go over some community guidelines for everyone.
Oh,
So
yes.
Thank you for tuning in, everyone. We just want to let you know that this talk is being recorded. So before we begin, we just wanted to talk over and go over to establish some community guidelines to make sure that this talk runs smoothly. Just for this talk, we ask you that to not post anything in the comment section that could potentially be hateful, abusive, offensive, or has the ability to threaten or harass anyone. This is a safe space where we all can feel part of a community. So we really just want to emphasize that. We also ask you not to post private information of other individuals that may not be relevant to the topic, and that could potentially disrupt the flow of what we're going to be discussing today. We have an acronym that we hope that you guys can abide by called ELMO, which is just like enough, let's move on. For any reason during the discussion you feel that may be a little bit controversial, at one point you just let it go and just move on, and we want to respect our speaker for the time that she is having with us today. But that's pretty much it. We want you to have fun and enjoy what Lizbeth is going to be presenting. And now I'm going to pass it over to Jasmine so she can give you a little bit better introduction on who we're going to be having this discussion with.
Thank you, Alex. I will introduce Lizbeth's biography now. So, Lizbeth de la Cruz Santana is a fourth-year PhD candidate at the University of California, Davis, working towards a PhD in Spanish with an emphasis on human rights with a focus on immigration. She received her BA and MA in Spanish from Fresno State. De la Cruz is currently a graduate student at UC Davis, where she works as a research assistant and teaching associate. Her academic scholarship emphasizes a publicly engaged digital humanities approach through fieldwork in the US-Mexico border. Her role as a facilitator for the documented Dreams Without Borders and Humanizing Deportation digital storytelling projects provide the platform for undocumented immigrants/migrants and deportees to participate as knowledge creators. Through her participation as a 2019 Imagine America Page Fellow, Lizbeth intends to apply her research and fieldwork on the deportation of childhood arrivals by co-developing with Danilo Castillo Migri Map, a mobile application for migrants, deportees, and asylum seekers in Tijuana, Mexico. Currently, as part of her dissertation work, she has coined the childhood arrivals diaspora term, a concept that inquires on the forced expulsion of childhood arrivals to the U.S. through the apparatus of deportation. Additionally, in order to think through more ethical approaches to childhood arrivals, De la Cruz has introduced a broad definition that takes into account several different migration paths to better identify childhood arrivals. Her dissertation will review the ways in which this broad definition exceeds those incorporated into DACA and proposals for the DREAM Act, questioning the ethical legitimacy of the limits of these programs. In the summer of 2020, as an Imagining America's Leading and Learning Initiative fellow for the Mellon Public Scholars Program, De la Cruz were engaged in action research, national networking, and the production of interactive tools and media for change agents who advocate for institutional change on behalf of public and activist scholarship. So without further ado, I would like to introduce Lizbeth de la Cruz Santana. Thank you.
Thank you for that introduction, and thank you again for welcoming me to this space. I think it's really exciting to see that UC Merced is doing something that, you know, it invites scholars like myself or people that basically went to school in the Central Valley. So just to provide a little bit of my background before I show the presentation, I grew up in Compton, California, so in the LA area. Most of my life was there before I turned 15. And then my family decided to relocate to Fresno. So I did my high school here at Hoover, and then I continued my studies at Fresno State. So I did both my undergrad and my master's there. And eventually, because I did want to pursue a PhD, I had to leave the Central Valley, and I decided to go to UC Davis. So let me share the screen with the presentation, and hopefully you can see it. Oh, it says it's disabled. Do you think you could probably share it on your end?
I just made you
Okay.
host. Can you try it one more time?
Yes. And perfect.
You can see it now.
Okay, and can you hear me too, right? Okay.
Yes.
Perfect. So let's start. So I titled this presentation, Your Research Starts With You, Working from the Personal and Academia to Build Your Own Blueprint. So for me, this title is very important because I feel that we always have to find that specific space from where we can really talk about things that matter to us and also to our community. And from my own personal experience, working from this experience of living as a daughter of parents who are immigrants and who came into the US undocumented and eventually were able to get the residency, has allowed me to explore different ways of belonging to the US and also not fully on belonging. And I feel like this feeling of being like a second class citizen, even though I was born in the US, has really shaped a lot of my insight in being part of a mixed status family and also being part of a community that is really going through a lot through the previous administrations. And my research does focus more on the Obama and Trump era. So you'll be able to see a little bit more of what I've been doing in the past couple of years now that I continued on my education at UC Davis. So one of the quotes that I really love from Ansaldúa, who is a scholar, and she really does advocate a lot for, you know, looking at the border in a different lens, and one that really does provide the space for folks like myself that feel like they don't belong either in the US or Mexico, to really figure out where is it that we do belong, right? So in that sense, I feel that her quote that I think you could see all over social media too, like on Instagram, it's do work that matters, vale la pena. So it's like, do work that really matters to you because it's worth it. So for me, working through that quote, and I see it like echoed throughout my whole entire journey at, you know, managing school and then also the work that I'm doing now, it allows me to feel like, okay, it's gonna be tough, but I'm able to do it. So I do try to work through the idea of manifesting the things that I want to do, and also not just being part of a safe space, but also brave spaces that allow us to really speak on issues that are important to us. So I think that idea of being brave allows us to, I guess, really test the status quo and really be ourselves. So that's something that I always try to push forward through my research. So I will be talking more on my work at the US-Mexico border, specifically in Playas de Tijuana, which is an extension of Tijuana. And this space here is very important to me because it has really shaped the work that I'm able to do at UC Davis. I first went to Tijuana, specifically to this part of the border in 2016. So it was the day that the elections came in for announcing that Trump had won the presidency. So we traveled from Davis to Mexico, and I remember just feeling very, like, I guess like in a limbo, not really knowing what that meant, but really figuring out that those implications of him being elected did and will be, you know, a very huge impact to a lot of the communities that I work with and family members and also close friends who either were undocumented or had DACA status. So just traveling to the side of the border with all of those things in mind really did push me forward to take this time very seriously and to really find a way that I could probably contribute using my positionality as a US citizen and someone who does have the privilege to cross this border. And then besides that, this border is very important to me as well, because my dad, in one of his crossings from Mexico to the US, he was able to cross through here. Obviously, it did not look the same as it looks in this picture, but you can just see that this space has always been in constant transformation. And I'll try to show that throughout the whole images that I did include on this presentation. And additionally, this picture here is very important because, as you can see, there's a family here and then a child. So this idea of looking towards the wall here implies to Tijuana, and on the other side you find San Diego. So it's this idea of like the hope to be there, right? But then it's always that idea of like a family unit crossing. So one of the biggest projects that I'm very proud of that has been able to, take shape during my time at UC Davis is the Blaise Tijuana Mural Project, which we started last year in September, August, and we continued in September. And it's a project that I'm currently working on as well right now in the moment. And we are hopeful to continue adding on portraits on this border wall in Blaise Tijuana. So we want to add in as many portraits with the idea to share these stories that each of these immigrants have to share. So one peculiar thing about them is that they are all childhood arrivals, which means that they came into the US when they were minors. And this definition that I'm trying to develop throughout my dissertation, I really do focus on the idea that they came into the US as children. And it doesn't matter if they came in with a visa or permanent residency or undocumented. What matters here is that they came into the US as minors and that they grew up and developed feelings of belonging and ties to culture and social aspects of the US. So for me, that's the biggest key here. And I will be sharing a little bit more about this project as we move forward. So now that I've been at UC Davis for 4 years now and going on to 5 in the next academic cycle, the idea of public engaged digital humanities has really allowed me to do the work that I want to do, not just now as a scholar, but also once I do obtain my PhD from the university. So I think for me, pursuing education has allowed me to look into ways that I could use my activism in a sense that it all combines together to provide some type of reciprocity for the communities I work with. So taking that into consideration, reciprocity was like a new term for me that I learned at the university, because for me it was always the idea of like, okay, let me give back. Like, how can I give back to, the DACA recipients that I worked with when developing an archive, or the folks down in Tijuana? How can I support them from, being in this space in education and in the academic space? So when I came across public engaged digital humanities as a Mellon Public Scholar, this is when I knew this is what I wanted to do, right? So I wanted to continue working on projects that, we were able to collaborate with the community, but also using digital tools to make that happen. And I think right now with the COVID-19, this is like the best way to go about a lot of our research that does come from the humanities and that has that social aspect, and we're working with real people that are still alive. So for me, working at a distance right now through my research and being able to connect with them like with Zoom or different platforms online has really made this project even more possible at the moment. So here I do have a few of like the projects that I've been able to work with. So like I mentioned earlier in my education, I did go to Fresno State, and I really value Fresno State because from them, I was able to, and I would say just like fall in love with the idea of testimonios, which is testimonies, and how folks would be able to share their stories through literature. And not just that, but also like different media. So for example, documentaries, poetry, and music. So for me, that was very powerful. And I think just my formation at Fresno State, specifically during my master's, allowed me to really think about different ways that I could implement, telling stories now at UC Davis. So at UC Davis, I was able to obtain training on how to do digital storytelling. And that really allowed me to be a facilitator and researcher for humanizing deportation, or humanizando la deportación. And that project is still currently in the works. We have around 300 digital narratives right now of deportees, and we've included now also asylum seekers who find themselves in Tijuana. So this archive is the biggest archive in the world with public access to stories by migrants themselves. So all we do from the university and academics is we help them facilitate this opportunity for them to become, knowledge creators, which is the biggest thing for me in my research. Because I feel like, in academia or, just being a student, we do have some type of privilege in the sense that we could, have access to a lot of books and research. But at the end of the day, this research is only possible because the agents that we work with or we are looking into exist. So for me, it's really important to bring them into the conversation and really center on what they have to say, because only then, specifically to deportation, we could look for real solutions that would really impact their lives. So that's something that I went into, with Manizando la Deportación. I wanted to understand what their experiences were like and what can we do now that we know what they lived through. So continuing on, after receiving training for digital storytelling, just having this background with working with documented folks, I wanted to work on an archive for political advocacy to really showcase the stories of what it means to be a documented, and what it means to also be in constant limbo and not knowing what this administration or the Obama administration was going to do with the DACA program. So this archive really allowed me to work with, immigrant youth in the US, and for them to really advocate for their own reasoning of why they should be in the US. So a lot of those stories did echo the idea of, like, I went to school here, my formation is here, my family's here. I can go back to Mexico, for instance, because I have no real connections, no real memories of what it meant to live there. And that has to do with the idea that a lot of them did cross or were brought by their parents or a family member when they were like babies. So for example, one of the youngest ones from the archive that we've seen so far was only days old when they crossed the border. And in this one for documented, I think the youngest one was around 3 months old. So when you think about those things, it makes you realize that we grew up with a lot of, undocumented folks, and we went to school with them, we worked with them. So I think it's really important to really acknowledge that they do belong in the US because they do have these cultural and social ties to, navigating US life. And for me, that was really important to understand more about their experiences. And a lot of these stories did come from the Central Valley, which was very powerful at the same time because we were able to see more of the experiences of, how does a male, undocumented, educated person navigate, undocumented life in the Central Valley? How is their family ties also affect his potential in his future and academic work, for example. So there's just a lot of stories behind, both the Humanizando la Deportación and Documented Archive. And if you want to know more about those, you are more than welcome to, check them out and really do spend the time to understand more about their stories. So now considering, both my education and my activism work in the Central Valley, I wanted to find a way to, create like a culminating experience for myself, coming from the university to provide something for the community in Tijuana. And that really came, it was something that has been developing through my first time in Tijuana in 2016. So when I first found myself in Tijuana, I saw all this artwork and all these messages that were plastered on the wall. And I really wanted to understand why there was an upside down flag. Why was it something tied to the deported veterans? So the first time I heard that there was deported veterans, I was like, how is that even possible? How can someone get deported if they serve, our military? And, just by being there in the field and not really like reading or anything, their own stories, I learned a lot in regards to what it meant to be a non-citizen in the US and being vulnerable to deportation. In simple terms, anyone who is a non-citizen could get deported if they commit a crime or a felony and, you're basically arrested by the police. And if the police in your city works with ICE, which is most of the cases, that's what's going on right now, then you are more prone to be deported or detained and spend a lot of your time fighting for your case in a detention center. So those were things that I learned just by doing field work. And then eventually, through my own education, I was able to just learn more about what research is saying about their cases. But I always wanted to highlight more about what they have to say and learn from their own experiences. So in my attempt to do something to really advocate for the community members and narrators in Tijuana, I decided to design a project that would allow them to tell their stories again, but through art. So that's where the Plaza Tijuana mural project came to be. And then eventually from the Plaza Tijuana mural project, we co-funded it's called a binational group called Dreamwell for childhood arrivals. So this group is really more of a binational effort to provide support to deportees in Tijuana who are identified as childhood arrivals. So it's a project of mine that I'm very, very proud of, and we have a lot of good things coming ahead for it as well. And I'll be sharing a little bit more of that. So just to bring it back more to the context of who we work with and collaborate with. So I have a story here of Jorge, and his digital narrative in the archive is titled Made a Criminal in America. And the first time I met Jorge, you know, I was taken away by him being so young. He was around my age, and then him saying that he was deported. And I just couldn't understand why someone so young was being deported and why he had spent most of his life now, you know, fighting for the idea of what, you know, coming back to the US. And he does have kids in the US, but he finds himself in Tijuana. So I'll read a little bit of his narrative. So he was speaking here to an immigration judge. So I've been here since I was 8 months old. I had no idea I was undocumented. But if you give me the opportunity, I will fix my status. But there was no way to fix my status. I'm not from the US, but Mexico doesn't consider me part of Mexico either. I had no country, nobody wanted me. So this part of his narrative for me was very powerful because it really sums up a lot of the sentiments that a lot of the deportees, you know, communicate in the archive. And for me, it's really unfortunate that in Jorge's case, he found out he was undocumented the moment he was arrested. So he didn't know that he was undocumented to begin with. And then finding out that he had to leave, you know, the US is also more of a trauma aspect to, you know, being forced out of the country that you have really strong sentiments towards. So just considering Jorge's story and knowing that he came into the US when he was just a baby really does make you wonder, why is it possible for the US to deport, you know, young immigrants? And also, why is there not an opportunity for them to fix their status legally, right? If that's what we want them to do, why are we not providing those opportunities for them to do so? So all these questions really have, you know, formed my research. And then also just, you know, learning from the geography or the space itself in Tijuana. We have, you know, for example, this border wall here with the migrant crosses, the ones who have passed away. And then we also have artwork here, like the 10 years. And at first, when I first saw this in Tijuana, I was like wondering, what does 10 years even mean? And then obviously, you know, learning from them, it's the 10-year bar most of them do get when they get deported. So it's just their constant reminder that they have 10 years to stay in Mexico for like their castigo, for example. And then once that's up, they could reapply and see if they could be considered for a visa or some type of legal reentry to the US. But in most cases, it depends on the government and our circumstances. So it's not always like a promising place for them. And then we have images of Border Patrol, and they're there all the time, and they're just, you know, at the border. And I really have really mixed feelings about them and, you know, what they do. But at the end of the day, it's like we see what's going on at the border. So it's like they're complicit to, you know, the immigrant struggle as well. And then we have this image here down at the bottom with Alex, who is a deported veteran. And this is just one of the sites of the flags in distress. So they have the names of those who have been deported as well. So the names, you know, they keep adding on. So it's just really unfortunate that deported veterans, you know, is still a thing in Mexico, and the US is slowly paying attention to what's been going on. And then, you know, here I do have some images of what has really impacted more of my work. So the idea of family separation, which is a really vital threat to a lot of the communities here in the US. And then I wanted to explore a little bit more of what it meant to be, you know, someone who has faced family separation, and how do you manage this from both sides of the border. So in one of these pictures I could see here, we are at Friendship Park, and you see a family that has been torn apart by deportation. So on the US side, you have the family. So you see a young lady here and a baby, and then behind them, Border Patrol. And on the other side, on the Mexican side, you see a father. So this was actually Father's Day. And here you could see that, families were able to come together in this space and share some moments together. But as you can see from just this image, you can really make out who's on the other side. So an image is distorted in this sense. So for me, that's very inhumane. Yes, there's a space for them to be able to talk to each other, but they can't even touch each other. They can't cross anything through this side of the wall. So my ideas or my questioning for this is how inhumane are our policies, but also how inhumane are the spaces that we create on the border. Even if they exist and we try to take them back and make them ours, they're still being inhumane, and they still reproduce these carceral and like prison-like atmospheres, which is something that really is just shocking here at Friendship Park as well. And then here we have a picture of the border. This is where the migrant caravan was gassed a few months ago. And for me, it's just like, it's so crazy how you're here in this border point, and just by looking towards the US side, you see San Diego, and then you see a whole different type of life. The economy is so different. And these two contrasting spaces, you're coming, from a space that is, more poverty, the access to work and health are not the best. And then you see, that you're always constantly reminded or tested on what the other side looks like. So I think this is like a really high contrast there. And one of the most like special pictures that we do have here are the Estrada family photograph with Carla Estrada, who is a documented, and she is also a really great advocate for the community. She's a dreamer. She has been part of the movement as well for advocating for youth. And then we have the image of her family here. The brother got deported back in 2017, and then the mom and the dad followed because he came to the US when he was just a baby. So his notion or ties to Mexico were non-existent at the time. And they were trying to, protect him because at the end of the day, that's their son. So they made the difficult decision to cross back to Mexico. And Carla, because she had her status and she wanted to continue pursuing her career and law school in UCLA, she decided to stay in the US. So I think a lot of families do face a lot of this, concept of facing hard decisions and figuring out what they will do, because at the end of the day, in her narrative, she says something like, I wanted to do something that would pay forward for what my parents did of coming to the US. So at least one of the children were able to stay and, just continue their family's dream. And I'm not sure if it's necessarily the American dream, but at least that family unit's dream and persistence, to have a better life. So, throughout my time in Tijuana, which I'm going into 4 years now and engaging in fields work there, I came across a lot of different narratives. And fortunately, I have been able to, meet a lot of the childhood arrivals and create, some type of familiarity of links and, just getting to know them a little bit better. So we have folks like Yuleni, Jorge, Arturo, Ruben, and then Isaac, and then Angel, and just so many more that have been able to really create a space for folks to know more about what it meant for them to grow up undocumented or with a visa or with permanent residency in the US. So in the cases of the child arrivals that I am focusing on currently on my research are the ones who came in undocumented and remained undocumented throughout their whole time in the US. So we have a story here, for example, of Isaac, and he grew up in the US and made a life in San Diego and tried to obtain a driver's license. But at that time, there was no way for him to, legally obtain a driver's license because he didn't have a social or any type of identification from the government. So he continued driving without, a license, got a lot of tickets, got a lot of his cars taken away, but he still kept persistent, and I think that's something that it's really beautiful from the immigrant community, the idea that we still have to survive, so we're going to find ways to make it happen. So eventually, on his way to church, he was persecuted by Border Patrol because he did live in San Diego, so that border area is highly patrolled. And he had nothing bad going on with him, and he wasn't even driving at that time. It was it was a pastor who was driving them both to church, and Border Patrol decides to stop him at the checkpoint. They were going to let him go because, like I said, clean record, nothing wrong in that situation. But because Border Patrol did have to meet quota for that month, they decided to arrest him. So when you consider that, even if immigrants try to behave well, which is what the US wants, right? They are still vulnerable for deportation because it depends on the discretion of the officer that is engaging with them. So unfortunately, Isaac was detained and he decided to be processed for voluntary departure instead of spending time in a detention center. So I think that's really important to acknowledge that a lot of the times they're voluntary departure. So when they signed to get deported, it's not because they wanted to, it's because they were forced to. Especially when you hear stories about how the detention centers look like and the lives that people have there, and just this traumatic experience of being in a space that's super cold, not comfortable at all. The food that you get there is not even real sustainable food for a lot of our community members. And I think that's really important to understand that they're not weak if they decide to sign voluntary departure, but I think these spaces are created for them to do so. Even if they decide to fight their case, a lot of the times they need a lot of money to pay for legal fees, and they have to find a good lawyer, a lawyer that's trustworthy as well. So we've heard a lot of stories about immigrants who were trying to fix their status, or that they were detained, but their lawyer was basically just taking advantage of their situation, knowing that there was no way that they were going to win their case. So it's something to consider, when thinking about, okay, if I want to be a lawyer, how ethical am I going to be? So I think for me, a lot of the stories that are communicated throughout the archive really ask you how ethical are the things that we're doing, as scholars, researchers, community members, and also lawyers. Like, how are we really helping out this community that it's already vulnerable? So, working in Tijuana, I've identified different stories of childhood arrivals. So I decided to reach out to different childhood arrivals who do live in Tijuana, and some are dreamers. And one of them is a permanent resident who was previously deported. So it's John Guzman. So in his case, he was deported after finishing high school. He went into immigration checkpoint because, when you are in the US, you have to go in for your check-ins. And unfortunately, what happened in his case is that they told him that he was no longer eligible to stay in the US. So he was deported back to Mexico, but something did change in his status. And because he was a really well-known runner in his community, he was able to come back to the US because someone helped advocate for his case. Then you have someone like Jairo and Carla who have DACA status, and they are currently here in the US, and specifically in California. And they're both doing really great work. Jairo is a musician, and also he is a counselor here in the Central Valley. And then we have Isaac, whose story I shared previously. Unfortunately for him, he was deported months before DACA was implemented. So if DACA would have been in place, or if he would have still been in the States while the program was in place, he would have easily qualified because he had a clean background and he was going to school, working, so everything great in his case, but he was deported before that. Then you have Tania Mendoza, who I've co-created Dreamworld with, and in her case, she was deported because she grew up with a deportation order. So in her case, her lawyers for her family, they actually, instead of petitioning for their residency, petitioned for asylum. And because she was a Mexican resident or national, Mexican nationals at the moment couldn't apply for asylum. So obviously what happened there is that the judge ruled for their deportation, and she grew up in the US knowing that she had that pending in her case. And unfortunately, because she did have an encounter with the police, she was deported and left a daughter in the US. So she, now in this 2020, she had met her 10-year bar. So we're trying to see if there's a way for her to be able to come back to the US so she could be reunited with her daughter. And then same case with Montserrat. She does have 2 daughters in the US and hasn't seen them since her deportation. So you see all these stories, of people not being able to communicate with their family. And you have someone like Andy, who grew up in the Central Valley, and he's actually from Merced, no, from Madeira, Madeira. And, you know, I think he has a big chance right now to come back to the Central Valley because he is a deported veteran, and, you know, they're trying to figure out a way for him to come back. So that's something that does give us hope, you know, that these stories, in my case, if I was a lawyer, I feel like these cases are easily manageable in the sense that we could help them come back to the US with some legal status, or at least consider them for a visa in that sense. And let's see the next slide. So basically, now that, you know, I've been able to work on this project, which is the Playa de Tijuana mural project, as part of my doctoral dissertation, I'm trying to figure out ways that we can really create a more ethical way of helping out those that have been deported to Mexico, and also protect the ones who are currently in the US. So for me, it's really important to, you know, not just only focus on the dreamers that are in the US or those who are undocumented, but to also look beyond the border and see, you know, who are the casualties of our policies that we've implemented and engaged in for so many years. And just a quick fact, deportation is a rarely like new tactic that the US has implemented. So it's been in place for like around 20 years. So it's a basic, like a new thing that we've been doing for so long, but it has escalated in the way that it has really impacted our communities. So throughout the years, we do hear a lot of like, you know, ICE has been doing this, and you know, the tactics of, you know, persecution and, you know, all these human right violations. But when you consider what type of rights do undocumented immigrants have in the US and who is really advocating for them. So it really allows you to see, you know, how crazy or how hard it is to really manage, you know, undocumented immigration to the US. So here you could see a little bit of the documentary that I've worked on for the Playa de Tijuana mural project. So what I'm trying to do here with this documentary is to basically translate my doctoral dissertation into an audiovisual platform. So I'm trying to make something that is easy to understand through, you know, imagery and small clips from the border and us working here. So as you've been able to see, you could see the portraits. You have Isaac, Jairo, Tanya, Andy, Montserrat, Carla, and then at the end, it was John. And as you can see here in this space, you could see how nature is able to cross back and forth, you know, like with the water from that border. People go about their lives here in Playa de Tijuana. But then with the changes of through the caravan, you see how the space has been transformed with the barbed wire and just different type of fencing to prevent folks from like crossing. And but I think it's very ironic how this space just becomes even more, I guess, you want to be there because you want to see what the whole fuss is about, right? And then I have other clips here as well of how, you know, this is Friendship Park, and just different moments at the border since my time there, and like the new fence that has been constructed and added on, and just how a lot of like the imagery at the border communicates a lot of like the US as well, with like that McDonald's mural there. So for me, it's just really important to, you know, use my platform in academia to really, you know, share what I've seen so far and how my experiences there have allowed me to basically create some type of knowledge and scholarship. So for me, it's really important to, you know, propose a new way to identify childhood arrivals. So like I mentioned before, it's anyone who came into the US as migrants, either with a visa or permanent residency. And then also for me, it's really important to find a way to describe their experiences in a more general, broad, and inclusive way. So I've coined the term childhood arrivals diaspora, which really focuses on the idea of their forced displacement from the US. And considering that is more of the idea that they were forced to be removed. So when I mentioned the voluntary removal and then how they signed that paper, or when people just figure out that they can't continue their studies in the US because even after they receive like their high school diploma or a college degree, how can they really make a life in the US when they don't have the real or legal ways to have a real job in the US? So a lot of them do decide to go back to Mexico or their country of origin. And I think it's just really unfortunate how a lot of them have to take those hard decisions of, you know, separating themselves from a space that they grew up in and having to start all over again in a foreign country, even if that's the country they were born in. And just to talk a little bit more about who are childhood arrivals, um, the vast majority of the ones who are in the US are Mexican nationals, but they also come from Latin America and other countries. But the biggest numbers are from Mexico, and I think it has to do a lot with the US and Mexico relationships throughout the whole years. So for instance, my grandparents were braceros. So they were part of the bracero program, which was an immigrants, guest workers program that was implemented after the war. And, you know, we wanted to have workers supporting and really sustaining our economy. But after we didn't need them anymore, after the war was over, so what do you do with those that wanted to stay in the US? Because once you see something that's good, you want to stay there. And you're making good money and you're helping your family back home, so you're sending back money. Why would you want to leave that behind? So a lot of the folks did, you know, went back to their families and relocated to the US. So I think at the end of the day, the US does have to really pay close attention to, you know, how are we going to manage the idea that people do have this real human instinct of migrating and they want to migrate to the US? So why are we not really focusing on those that have already done so and really provide them a real solution to their status? So for me, it's really important to consider a real and really accessible way to provide a legal path to residency and then citizenship to child arrivals, regardless if they have a criminal history. So something that I feel is really important to know is that even if someone does have a criminal history in the US and gets deported to Mexico, at the end of the day, they were created or formed to be criminals in the US and not in Mexico. So it is an issue that we have to look into, because I feel that you would become part of a gang or you would commit a crime based on your formation in the US and not of the country that you were born in. So I think the US does really need to look into that and not just displace, you know, these young migrants or even now adults to a country that they don't really know. And even if they do have like a cultural heritage because their families keep, you know, the Spanish language alive, or, you know, music or film or icons, I think it's really important to know that those are just references and not real parts of their belonging or, you know, formation. So this is just more about, you know, the documentary that, you know, it's still in constant development. And in the near future, we're going to be, hopefully with this whole situation that's going on right now with the pandemic, my plan is to go back to Tijuana in September and add in around 7 to 8 more faces. And the idea behind that is that I want to include the faces of those who are child arrivals currently in the US, and also those who have a criminal history and have been deported to Mexico, because I think it's really important to really show and highlight and bring into the conversation, you know, what it means to be a child arrival and what it means to now be in Mexico, and how are you, you know, making a life there? How are you succeeding? What are your challenges? And how can, you know, we support throughout a binational effort? So as you can see here in these clips, I think it's really fascinating how the community members themselves were able to paint their portraits. So you were able to see Tanya and then Isaac. And then here, Mauro Carrera, who is also an artist here in the Central Valley and just really well known in the US and in Mexico. He was basically our teacher and learning how to use this technique, and where we're just basically showing the image through a projector and drawing it on this type of canvas, and then using wheat paste to, you know, basically put the images at the border. So we couldn't really paint on the actual fence that's there because we were afraid that we were gonna lose the image or its powerful, you know, sense, because these are actual portraits that were photographed by Leopoldo Peña, and we basically just transformed them into art here at the border. So you could see here we were putting some primer, and it's all boat primer because we wanted to make sure that the images were going to be preserved for the longest time that possible. The paint that we were using, it's Nova paint, so it's meant to last around 10 years. But since it is at this border, part of the US-Mexico border, and it's on the beach, the sun, the rain, the salt specifically could eat up the paint and the materials. We wanted to make sure that we were using the best quality possible when engaging in this work. I can also share the link to this documentary so you could hear the music behind it. The music was provided by Jairo Lozano, who's also on the mural. So I think his music does really make it more fun and upbeat to really understand what's going on here. And yeah, so I'm just really excited that you were able to see more about what this project is and how it's hopefully going to continue growing in the future. And we're going to see what happens now with, the COVID, and if we're able to go back in September. But if not, we will eventually go back and paint. And we do invite community members who are able to travel to Tijuana to be there and help us out. Everyone there was a volunteer, and I think that was even more meaningful for us because not only were the narrators themselves like Montserrat present, or Tanya or Isaac helping us out, but just, people from Tijuana or people that learned about the project and wanted to like help and support. So one of the clips that you saw there was also a QR code. So what that means is that anyone who gets close to the mural could scan with their phone the QR code, and it would take you to the story of the person that's painted on the wall. And then I've also included the stories of around 200 to 300 other immigrants from the archives. So anyone who wants to learn more about what it means to be deported or a child arrival can just scan through the QR code through their phone and then listen to the stories. And for me, that aspect of being digital at the mural was really important because all the time, people would really ask me like, Liz, what can I do to, know more about what's going on? And because I'm very active on social media and I do try to share my work so folks can know, like, you could do it yourself too. You can learn how to do this, or if you want to be a part of it, it's, these are the tools that are available at the moment. So for me, just scanning the QR code and just listening to the story is one form of you being involved. The second one would be to share the story on your social media. And if you have the resources, maybe reaching out to one of the narrators and see how you can support them. And the other one is that if you know lawyers or anyone that can support them, like an organization or NGO, then that would be the most ideal form as well. So it's just ways to give community, the idea that they could also be engaged allies and really do something to advocate for the communities that we're working with. So yeah, so these clips, I'm just very happy. Like this lady here, she spent a lot of time with us there at the border in September. And, a lot of people were like, why are they painted there? Who are they? Are they famous? They wanted to know all these things. But for me, it was just more like, okay, for me, it was more powerful when they mentioned that they felt represented on the mural, even though it wasn't them who were painted there, because they would remember how they crossed, and then also how their life did change when they had a legal status in the U.S. and were now able to come back to Mexico. Okay, so I'll conclude with that, and I am more than happy to answer any questions, or if you have any comments as well, and just getting to learn a little bit more about your interests in regards to how my research and your positions also could overlap. All right, thank you.
Okay, nice. Thank you, Lizbeth. We really appreciate that presentation. We're going to go ahead and transition now to the Q&A portion. And so if you do have a question, feel free to ask it in the group chat. Just be sure to make sure to include your name, your year, your major, just to make it a little bit more personable to when we ask Lizbeth, and of course the question that you have. But actually our first question comes from one of our student coordinators, Brianna. She's a fourth year poli-sci major. She wants to know, how was the process of receiving access to actually paint the mural on the fence? What difficulties did you face for that portion? Did you get any pushback? And how did you deal with that situation to actually get access to actually paint on the?
Yeah, this is a really good question. And a lot of people do ask me this because they want to know, how can just like someone, and I would say like a random person, go and paint at the wall? So what ended up happening is that when I came up with the idea of the mural, I reached out to Robert Vivar, who is also a deported veteran in Tijuana, and he's highly known in the community. And he would be the one who I would always like reach out to if I had a question, and like, how would I do this? Or who can I contact if I want to do this? He would be like my guide in Tijuana, and he still is my guide down there. And I mentioned, I want to paint a mural. Do you know the artist who is the one in charge of the Plaza Tijuana area of painting murals, which is called Mural de la Hermandad. So the brotherhood, the mural of brotherhood, something like that. And he's like, yeah, he's our friend, and he's actually in Tijuana. And I was there in Tijuana in that moment because I had just finished my qualifying exams and I needed a break from studying, and I had already passed my qualifying. So I was a candidate now. So I was like, okay, I need to go and celebrate, but be alone and just de-stress. So I went down there with the idea of not working, but I ended up working because, I was able to meet Enrique Chio, and he was very nice to me. And, I met up with him at the border, and he's like, yeah, like I only talked to him for like 30 seconds about the project. And he's like, yeah, that sounds great. Let's do it. And that's all I had to do. I just had to talk to him, and it just came so easily. I couldn't believe it, but I was so happy that it was made possible. So I was able to do this because we engaged in a collaboration. So we decided to work together and make my mural part of, El Mural de la Hermandad. So that's how we are, in some sense, protected or allowed to work there. And all he had to do was to make sure that, the authorities in Tijuana knew we were going to be painting, because our mural is actually by the water, so in the ocean area. So in comparison to the murals that are part of his project, which are more towards like the inside, like the inland. So for us, it was a little bit more complicated because we were actually, down by the water. But we made it happen in the summer. But basically that's what happened. And he does have some type of permit to work there, because he did reach out to both governments, the US and Mexico, but the fence is owned by the US. So in any moment they could always, take out any type of artwork that they want. So it's something that's been going on right now with, the new the new wall that has been, implemented by the Trump administration. But I think our mural would never be taken down just because of the material that it's made of, and it's super heavy and it's by the water. So I think that's not going to happen anytime soon. But that's basically how it happened. And yeah, thank you for that question. Yeah.
Thank you.
Thank you, Liz. Our next question is from Alexandra Chavez, and she asks, Liz, in your experience, how can programs such as STEP support our dreamer and undocumented scholars in spaces such as higher education?
Yeah, you see, thank you. This is a really important question because, I feel like there's a lot of support for dreamers or youth, to continue their studies. And it's something that we always push for, just continue, advance in higher ed, and like you could do it. But what's actually set up for them to do so? What's accessible for, not just like the valedictorians or the ones with the highest GPAs to do so. So for me, it's really important to really implement like grants or scholarships that are, accessible to a wide range of students, not just those with like the best grades. And I think that's really important too, because, you have to really support effort. And I think we do run our, system with the idea of excellence. But at the same time, I feel like undocumented students do face a lot of different barriers than, their counterparts. And I think it's really important to also value other ways that they're, contributing to their communities or their schooling. So I think for me specifically in higher ed, something that's, in a conversation that I've been having at UC Davis is how are we supporting our documented or dreamers in higher ed when we don't know if, DACA is still going to continue after, the new school year, for example. So for me, it's really important to see how, grad departments, like graduate school departments, are supporting them. So in a personal experience with one of my close friends, she's actually going to be part of the mural. So I think you will learn more about her story. So she accepted UC Davis because they were going to be supportive with her case. So she's our first streamer in our Spanish department. And then now that she's almost done with her master's at UC Davis, she applied to be also in the PhD program. So now that she's at the PhD level or starting in the fall, we don't know if DACA is still going to be here or implemented. So what's going to happen with her work permit? Because she's able to be, a grad student and her tuition is being paid for and she's able to work because she has this work permit. So in our case, we do worry about, okay, what would it mean if DACA doesn't exist and she still wants to continue with her education and she has signed this contract? So I think implementing ways to pay them through stipends would be another option. Something that doesn't require any type of like identification or like government issued IDs or anything like that. So for me, that's one of the biggest things, because, you do hear a lot of stories about, folks that might lose their DACA status too because of some paperwork, something happened. But I think if departments are ready or start thinking or asking themselves, how can we support them? Then that's a big start as well. And also ask them directly, like, how can we support you, especially during summer? If there's no scholarships during that time, maybe providing internship opportunities that would also enhance, their CVs or resumes. I think that's also important. And, just, I think at the end of the day, seeing what they need specifically. So emergency funds also are important, helping them pay for their books and just, day-to-day life. So I think, just learning from UC Davis, like the Dream Center there, I know they do have, emergency funds if they need to buy food or books or anything, just, they don't have to say what they're using it for, as long as that they're using it for, their rent or things like that. So I think if there's like a way to, ask, Dream Centers, what are you doing to support your students? Then I think that's like a good start also to, implement to other programs. Thank you.
Nice. Thanks, Lizbeth. So actually, I have a question. Can you talk a little bit more about the motivation for creating the Migri Map app? What was the process like for the design, the content? Like, how'd you make the application? Who'd you collaborate with to get it done? That's interesting. So could you talk a little bit more about that?
Yeah, so Migri Map is still currently, in the development stages. So unfortunately, it was supposed to be not like done, but most of its portion completed by like next month. So I was actually in Tijuana with Danilo when we had to return back to the US because of COVID. And, the idea that the border was going to be closed, and it did shut down like 2 days after we came back. So we made it back to the US. So unfortunately, we had to postpone our in-person fieldwork. So right now we're working remotely to develop the app. So we are actually kind of shifting gears because we want to include all the resources right now for COVID-19 for migrants in Tijuana. So we're still doing, like identifying shelters, and we already have that list ready. And also making sure that we're mapping them onto that Google map that we have collaborated with the Comité, which is the Human Rights Committee in Tijuana. So for me, it's just really important to, understand that, this pandemic is our biggest thing that it's affecting the world. So how is this, being managed by shelters? How are migrants still going about their day to day when there's something like this happening? And how are they protected or not being protected? And what resources can we, advocate for them to, not fall victims or, be another casualty of, not having support for them health-wise. So basically, Migri Map came to be in September. So it's just like, I think everything just aligns for us, and I am just really happy with that. So I was showing the documentary that you were able to see a little bit here. And Danilo, I didn't know him before. So he came to the viewing, and I was having a meeting for Dreamwell with Tanya and other members in the community there. And he stayed because he went with one of our friends. And I was talking about, Madera, and then, Madera here in Fresno, and also just the idea that I felt frustrated that day because we had encountered 4 migrants who had just recently been deported. And I was crossing back from San Diego, and I was able to listen into a conversation. So one of the men, his last name is Castro, he was asking immigration officers where could he go to, eat and like find shelter. And immigration was just like, oh, we don't know. And I was just like, how do you not know if like a shelter's right there, like crossing the bridge? And it's yellow, you could see it. So it's not like you don't know what's here. So I feel frustrated. And, I stopped and I told the man, I'm like, hey, you don't know me, but I've worked here in Tijuana and I could help you if you want to go with me. So I guess, I think he figured what else can I do? So he went with me, and I told him I'm going to meet a friend, and she's here just at the port of entry. So I was with Tanya, and I was talking to him, telling him about my work so I could build some trust with him and let him know that I knew what I was doing and I was not just going to like take him some random place. So he went with us, and then eventually on the way, he's like, you know, there's other 3 men that have also been deported, and we were all like together right now. And I just came here to see if there was some way to get some support. So we ended up taking the men to Playas de Tijuana. Unfortunately, because it was a weekend, a lot of the shelters were closed. And, you know, just considering that I was highly connected, I had the personal phone numbers from a lot of the directors of the shelters, and a lot of them were like not answering, or they were like, yeah, you know, there's someone else at the shelter, they'll let you in. But unfortunately, because different shelters have different populations that they help, these were just honestly just men who had a criminal history. They were just deported because they had served their time in jail. So a lot of the shelters didn't take that type of profile at the moment. So for me, that was just like, okay, these are like the most vulnerable communities from the deportees, right? So a lot of the support does go more into children and women and like family units or LGBTQI, which makes sense to me. But at the same time, we're reproducing their vulnerability because we're not allowing them to really integrate, you know, or find resources for them. And that's why when you go to Tijuana, you see most of the men live in the streets or in this space called El Bordo, which is just like a bridge in Tijuana. And for me, it's just like so unfortunate that a lot of them, even after they, you know, might have the resources to make a life in Tijuana, they don't have that opportunity to set up to build on that. So what ended up happening that day, we couldn't find a shelter for them. Luckily, we did get some donations for them to have like a new change of clothes, because they wanted to change from the clothes that they were wearing since they were deported and were given back the clothes that they were arrested with. So these clothes were maybe like 20 or 10 years, you know, like old, and they weren't washed. So they had all the smells and the trauma of when they were detained. So when you think about that, and just like a regular person, you are, you know, detained, you spend your time in jail, your life changes, you know, a lot of them did have kids, you know, and family, and then you get deported and you're giving back your belongings, but you have to wear those clothes again. So they wanted to shower. That was the first thing they wanted to do, to shower. So I was thinking about all these things, and that night after, you know, having that viewing, I was just, you know, we were reflecting on what had happened that day. And so I was just like, I wish there was like a list where I could just be like, or on my phone, something that I could just access right away and say, okay, I want to find showers for, you know, males. Where can they go and how much does it cost? What are the hours of operation and where's it located, you know? And we didn't have any of that. You know, you just really need to know Tijuana so well to know where to go. And I also wanted to know, okay, where are the shelters in Playa de Tijuana? What about Tijuana? And what when can they go there? What time do they have to start making line? And you know, what if they're at capacity? Where else can they go? Or what about food? You know, where can they go get food if they get deported in the morning and they miss like the breakfast time in one of the soup kitchens? So for me, all those questions really got me like upset. I was just like, I can't believe like this is happening. And, you know, a lot of these men didn't know Tijuana. So they're more vulnerable to crimes or, you know, just being affected by really not belonging and being able to be identified by, you know, el crimen organizado in Mexico, for example. So Danilo and I were just, you know, he listened to my conversation and he just approached me and we set up a meeting and we started working on meeting map in the next 2 days. And we've been working on it since then. So right now we're working for the Comité in Tijuana. So we're looking for folks that want to help us develop the app. So right now what we're doing is that we're going to create a physical guide, which is going to be printed and given out to migrants. And then we're also going to develop, and we're actually working on that right now, a website with all the resources so anyone could, you know, be able to check them out. And then eventually the app is the one that we want to, you know, launch, because this app is going to be very important for us since we're trying to make sure that it doesn't require data and that anyone who has a smartphone could use it. And also one of the questions that we get is that how are migrants gonna use this if they don't even have smartphones? But you'll be surprised, a lot of them do have smartphones because, you know, the phone is the way for them to communicate to their families in their home countries, right? Like in Salvador or Guatemala, or Haiti, or Cambodia. So I think it's just really important to know that, we can't underestimate migrants because they do have the tools and technologies. Also, Europe uses a lot of apps to help out the migrant community. So my questioning behind all of this is, why is Mexico not doing something similar for the communities there? So we are looking for volunteers who want to help us make this happen. So if you know anyone who's like an engineer or knows how to do coding or just is interested in learning how to make sense of data that's on the ground, and we're welcoming that even more. But yeah, so Migri Map is still currently in the works, but we do have a map with just like basic information that's currently available online as well. Thank you.
Thank you, Liz. We actually have two questions from Brianna Bell. One of them is, amidst of COVID-19, what active role can we play in holding our government accountable for inadequate healthcare to immigrant families?
Yeah, I think this is, it worries a lot of folks because I remember when it all started, I think the US just basically tries to protect its own citizens, but even within the citizen population, there's some type of like racial implementation of who is going to get the help or access to, the test to see if you have the COVID. But in regards to the immigrant families, I think right now, at least in California, the governor is actually trying to support economically, right? And I think that's very helpful. But what about the other states in the US, right? Because it seems that our government is not comprehensive on the impact of, before COVID, the access to healthcare for immigrant families or immigrant communities, or just the undocumented, what type of opportunities did they have to, go to the doctor. So I'm not surprised that their negligence or, incapacity to understand what we need is, it's coming to effect right now. So for me right now, I think it would be really good to, I think social media is very powerful at the moment in advocating for resources. There's a lot of spreadsheets going around with information. And I could look for those as well because I've shared a few with, what is out there in your community, right? To if you need to go to a doctor, if you need to get a test, who can support you with that as well. But I think the power of social media or just the internet really does provide, folks the ability to be activists and really do the work that the government should have been doing for the longest time. But I think with the undocumented community, it's always been, allies supporting them in the moment. So I think what we can do, just like as regular, people, I think we could look out for these resources as well and see how we can continue sharing this information in languages that, immigrant communities could really have access to. So like Spanish or, any other languages that you see prominent in your community. So I think it's really important that, yes, the news are talking about what's happening, but also provide solutions, because I think that's also something that's missing when listening to the news. So I stopped watching the news. Like I would watch it every morning, and that wasn't helpful at all. And I think you're just getting more scared of what's going on. And I think knowledge is power, but at the same time, the way that we express what's going on can really affect a lot of folks. And I think, just with the immigrant communities, they're the essential workers right now, and they're more at risk, in being impacted by COVID-19. And I think, just letting them know of like things that they can do and implement in their home if they have to go out to work. And at least in my family, everyone's an essential worker. So it's been something that we've been considering since this whole pandemic started. And, changing your clothes, wearing a mask, and trying to get the N95 mask if you possibly can, but also cover that mask with another cloth or something that could be washable, and cleaning your hands and making sure that you have the appropriate like cleaning, liquids or things like that to really disinfect areas. And, just being precautious and knowing that if you do get the COVID-19, that you do have access to resources as well. Yeah, thank you.
Okay, our next question comes from our program coordinator. Do you plan on expanding your fieldwork and services to other parts of the US/Mexico border, such as El Paso or Juarez?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, can you talk a little bit more about that?
Yeah, so that's been one of my biggest things for me to work like in El Paso, Mexicali, Calexico, that like that area, because I think that the way that they see or, um, go about the border there is a little bit different to Tijuana. For me, I don't know, just like by the moments that I've been in Mexicali, I feel like the border there tells us something even more about how, we're still going to continue implementing border walls and, spaces that are super violent for migrants. At least in my experience in Mexicali, the border wall there is more porous. So you were able to see more of the both sides of the wall. So I think that at least for the family reunification that we did there, that space was actually more ideal than Playas de Tijuana. Because in Mexicali, at least in that border where we were at by the line, you were able just to be by the wall and touch the wall, and you were able to touch the person on the other side. So it's like if you're like in a fence in your home and you're just trying to get something from the other side. But in Tijuana, you don't have that. So I think the way that Tijuana has been, militarized is also just kind of like alarming too, and I think excessive as well. But I do want to work in Texas, like in El Paso, for example, and that's where we're trying to expand to Mickey Map after finishing Tijuana. We're trying to do other border towns, and also places like Ciudad de Mexico or Guadalajara that have high concentrations of migrants. But for me, Mexicali and that area in Calexico is another space that I want to look into, and also explore ways that they engage with arts and to see how the immigrant community is also involved. But yeah, that's one of my goals, and I hope that I'm able to do something before I do get my PhD, but if not after, I think that would be another great place to start. Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Thank you, Liz. Brianna asks, do you have a brochure flyer that we can use to advertise the opportunity to work on the Map app, just in case scholars that might be interested on the opportunity?
Yes, we do have one, and I could also send it over, and I'll make sure we publish it on our social medias. So we do have an Instagram, Twitter, and Facebook. So I think that would be like, get more information about Map, and you could also contact us. So I think let me check on my Instagram. We're under Map. Yeah, on Instagram.
Thank you. She also said, I saw on your Instagram that you were accepted into the Law Fellows program for the Central Valley. Congratulations. How do you feel this program will further your current work with immigration?
Yeah, so I was like so surprised to be honest that I got accepted. I applied just thinking, oh my God, like how am I gonna get into it, because I'm already a PhD student. They might see that as an obstacle to continue. So hopefully maybe someday apply to law school. But I'm very happy, because I think UCLA has a really strong law program. And now that this program was made specifically for, Central Valley kids, I think that's very important too, because they want to see how they can support, our community. But I'm very happy because I think it would allow me to learn more about policy and the way that the law works. And that's something that I really feel is very important in my career, at least for the moment, because I'm reading so many books and just scholarship and research on people that are engaging in this type of work. And I want to know what it means when you talk about like I-94, like what is that? And now I know, but back in the day it was just kind of like all of these things are just harder, or how to learn how to read the law or understand what a 10-year bar means or a life bar means. And also when someone says that they accepted or signed their plea bargain, like I want to know what that means for immigrants, because at the end of the day, immigration law and the criminal system are tied together. So I want to understand a little bit more of, okay, so if an immigrant does this, how is that going to impact them because they do have this immigration status? So it's something that I think one of our community narrators really impacted me the most. His name is Ruben Bravo. And I worked with him in Tijuana. And, I was just so surprised how he was able to read the law without being a lawyer. And he actually grew up here in the Central Valley, and he was from Tulare. Yeah. And, he was just like, he knew all the terms, and he had spent so much time in jail that he was able to have access to the library there. And they had all these textbooks, and he was able to basically make a case on his deportation. And he would have won if, the court would have favored in his case. But I think for me, it was just kind of like that willingness to learn more. So for me, that's what I want to do through this fellowship. And, hopefully I get something good out of it in the sense that I enhance more of my research. But it's basically the biggest thing. Mm-hmm.
Okay, and then I have a question. So you're in your PhD program. Do you want to stay in academia? Do you want to be more, out in the field doing your activist kind of duties, or where you think you're headed to after you get your doctorate degree?
Yeah, I know it's a question that I always have. And I think now that I applied to this fellowship for the law program, and, I feel like I invested a lot of time in the PhD, and I love what I've been able to do from this point, because I do love being in the field and doing research. And right now I'm trying to transition into the idea of publishing, and, because that's the biggest thing for us. And I want to see if that's something that I'm going to love and be passionate about, because that's the biggest thing if I want to continue at a research institution, which is my goal, right? To stay in academia, be a professor, and be able to do research. I love teaching as well, but at the moment, I think research is more urgent for me. And I want to be able to, really see what else can I do based from my experiences at UC Davis. But for the moment, yes, I feel like I'm in this, I could go three ways. I could continue my creative side and push forward more of the artivism, so engage more in artwork pieces and follow that, and I think I'll be super happy with that. But I also want to do academia, because this is where I feel more myself, and I think law school is one that I think will challenge me the most, and I'll learn a lot, but it's going to be a new field for me. So it's going to be 3 new years of not knowing what's going to happen. But I think I'm fit for it. And I've been approached by different lawyers to see if I could do an internship or something with them. But since I'm in a PhD, it's really hard to manage my time. But I think having that approach by them has really made me feel like, okay, they see something in me that I might not see right now. But I think if eventually after finishing my PhD and doing a postdoc, and if I still have that energy or passion for law, then I'll pursue that route. But for the moment, I do want to stay in academia and see what else happens here, because I do want to have that student contact as well, because professors or teachers growing up were the ones who influenced me to continue in higher ed. So hopefully I could be that to some of my students. Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Thank you, Lizbeth. Here's another question from Alex, but I do want to say that we are starting to reach the end of it. So if anyone has some final questions, please ask them. But Alex asks, what words of advice do you have for scholars that come with minoritized backgrounds wanting to continue their education with graduate or professional degrees?
Yeah, so, I've learned so much right now with, just applying for scholarships and fellowships, trying to see, where do I fit in? Because even though Latinos are a vast majority in the US, we're still considered a minority in education or higher ed. So definitely do apply for all the scholarships and fellowships that you think are fit for you. And even if you're questioning, oh my God, do I deserve this? Because I think self-doubt is the biggest thing for a lot of us. And I include myself highly in that. But just apply, do work a lot on your personal statements and make sure someone else reads them for you if you feel comfortable with that. But really be honest there. And I feel like it's really unfortunate too that sometimes we do have to kind of sell our suffering, or in a way kind of vocalize our experiences in a way that makes us, feel like the reader or the committee reading these scholarship applications will sympathize with us. But I think if that's going to get us to obtain the fellowships or scholarships to continue our education, then I think we should go for that. But at least for minorities, I do advise to look into diversity fellowships or scholarships, because those are the ones that we're more prone to obtain, because our diverse backgrounds do enrich, our colleagues' experiences as well, and then also what we bring to the table in higher ed. So at least in my case, that has really allowed me to bring something new to UC Davis, because we do have a lot of international students in our program. And for me, just being from the Central Valley, but also, part of a mixed status family also allows for me to ask questions that the university or my department has not thought about at the moment. So I think you're pushing their buttons in a way, but I think it's really important to have more of us in academia to really, create more bridges for, younger generations to think about higher ed as a possibility for them to enrich their lives and change, the future generations in their family. So I would say, just apply. And I think my biggest helper in applying for fellowships and scholarships has been Google. Like, since I started at Davis, it was like Google everything. And because, it's sad sometimes people don't really share resources with you. And for me, it's just like, how and why can't you? It's not going to hurt you. So I just Google everything, and that's how I've been able to, learn how to write grants. I learned how to write grants on my own fellowships and my letters of rec. I make sure I have all my documents ready, like my resume or CV, my personal statements, or at least bullet points of what I want to share. So I think having like an idea of what to send out to the folks that you're asking for letters is also important, and creating strong links and relationships with the people that you're, going to request these letters from, because you want to make sure that they're going to write a good letter for you. And yeah, there's just a lot to say in regards to that, but I mean, there's support out there right now. And I think if you give yourself at least, sometime in a day to just research and see what's out there in your college, or, sometimes there's communities, fellowships or scholarships too. So I think, they just want to give out money. So just go and apply and try to get it. Yeah.
I kind of want to ask one more question. So I'm also looking to for PhDs to apply this fall. So one piece of advice you wish you would have known before, starting your PhD
Yeah.
and surviving the whole PhD process, what's
Mhm.
one thing you wish you knew before, or about the whole process in general? I don't know, something along those lines.
Yeah, the process. Okay, so for me, I applied to, I was going to say 10 schools. But the biggest advice someone gave me at Fresno State, and she wasn't even my advisor, she was a professor that I had, es Doctora España. She's in Chicano Studies. And she just told me, make sure that the schools you're applying to have someone, at least 2 or 3 people at most, but at least one person that you could work with and you feel is going to be supportive in your work. So yes, the name of the school matters, and the department and all those things that eventually will help you in your career. But if that person that you will be eventually working with as your advisor and the committee is not there in that school, then any work that you want to do, even if it's important and it's timely and it's needed, then there's no point in applying to that school. So for me, that stuck to me throughout the whole time, I was applying, making sure that at least 1 or 2 professors met my research interests at that moment, or I guess potential research interests. And then also, I think the biggest key for me to get accepted to UC Davis was that I emailed the professor. So when I was applying, I emailed various professors from different schools, even the Ivy League schools, and they answered me. And they remembered me when I was applying. So when I was interviewing for UC Davis, the professor that I wanted to work with, which was Michael Lazara at the time, I emailed him. I was like, okay, there goes nothing. I'm just going to introduce myself, let him know that we have similar interest in research, and I would love to, get to meet him, hopefully, if I get accepted. And he wrote back to me right away. And when we had our phone interview, he remembered me. And I think that really made a significant difference in looking at the pool of applicants. So definitely reach out and make sure that there's at least 1 or 2 professors, and that the university might have support for the type of work you want to do. So in my case, research. So I want to make sure that the school that I want to go into does provide grants or, summer fellowships for me to engage in field work. So those are the biggest 2. Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Great, thank you, Liz. So I think that's going to wrap up our Q&A session and our talk for today. So thank you all so much again for joining us, and a big thank you to Lizbeth for the amazing information that you shared and the insights. And I'm sure that we all feel more empowered about pursuing our research pursuits and our own interests, and being more active in our communities and being more engaged and understanding the struggles and the experiences of those around us that might have different lives. So Thank you so much for sharing all of that. We were very grateful to have you. To everyone in the chat, please, if you can you complete the link to that Google form? It is an evaluation form. It just helps us assess how we're doing with our programming, so please do that. And if you are a STEP scholar, don't forget to also complete the form to count for your attendance of the event. But that concludes our speaker series number 2. Next week, we will be joined by Deborah Kang, I believe. She is the alumni and director. Yes?
Next week, Liliana.
Oh, my bad. We had an original schedule and things got changed when the pandemic hit, so my mind's everywhere. But next week, we're going to be joined by Liliana de la Paz. She is a researcher and I think chemical engineer for Gilead Sciences. She was the first Latina to earn a PhD in chemical engineering at Stanford. So she has a very interesting perspective, and a lot of her current work is revolving around COVID, incidentally. So it should be a very interesting and relevant talk given the circumstances of today's climate. So please join us next week. You can find the Zoom link and everything on our website and on our Instagram and social media. So we hope to see you next week again. Next week should be a great talk as well. So thank you, everybody. Have a great Thursday. It's almost Friday. Yeah. And so if the team, if you want to stick around for afterwards, that'd be great. Bye, everybody.
Thank you.
And Leilani is with us. Leilani, do you want us to unmute you?
Well, I just unmuted myself, so.
Oh, okay. That works too. Lizbeth, Leilani is the director of our department of the Bright Success Center. She is our director.
Oh.
Hi, nice to meet you through here.
Nice to meet you too. Thank you so much for sharing your wisdom and just joining us during this chaotic time, I guess, this time of uncertainty, and sharing your wisdom. I came in a little bit late, but everything that you said was just amazing and really inspiring, and I'm very grateful for you to take the time to generously share your journey. So thank you so much for
thank you. Yeah,
for
thank you for
doing that.
considering me.
Awesome.
Yeah, we're so lucky that you did this. I mean, I've been watching your work from social media, and I worked with Lizbeth at Fresno State. We worked with orientation. And so I've just been watching you. And when we came up with the series, you were one of the first persons that came to my mind to have speak to our scholars. So
thank you. Yeah. When you told me, I was like, oh yeah, that's exciting, because it's the Central Valley. And I think for me, it's always important to give back, at least with sharing, and making sure that at least other Latinas know that we could do something, if we want to do it. And yes, there's obstacles, but you could still push forward somehow,
Right. Yeah. Well, I think it went very well. I'm so excited, and we recorded it. So we're going to edit it a little bit down. So, it's accessible to scholars, and we're going to post it on Box and possibly our YouTube channel. And you already said that was okay, right?
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. Thank you so much for that. But, yeah, I think that's it. So thanks everyone for joining in. Yeah, we'll have a team tomorrow.
It's really good to see you all. I miss your faces.
Bye, Leilani.
Bye. I'll let you all do your debrief, but I just wanted to give gratitude to you all and to Lizbeth. Thank you so much for taking your time and sharing your story. Really appreciate that. And it's good to see you all. I wish I was with you, but you all are safe. So I'll see you later. Bye.
I'll see you in a bit, Leilani.
I think my sister has a question for Lizbeth.
Oh, right.
Oh, yeah. Sorry. Okay.
Hi.
I was wondering if there are any organizations that you can recommend that are helpful in getting students from minoritized backgrounds into college.
Yeah, so it just depends if they want to go to a specific field. But I know in Fresno City, they have the law school, Pathways to Law School. So that one, so there's a lot of programs that really want to help students go from the city level to the UC. So I wish I would have known about those when I was applying, but I know at least in Fresno State, the same thing. So they do encourage students to, reach out to their counselors. But I think, at least for the Central Valley, I would say the legal pathways to law school. You could also reach out to different places like ELF, which is the Education Leadership Foundation here in Fresno, and see how their internship opportunities could also help you, looking into applying to law school. But it just depends. Do you have like a major in mind, or?
Oh, I'm already in college. I go to UC Davis.
Oh, nice. Oh, cool. What are you studying?
Human development.
Oh, cool. Yeah. Okay, cool. Yeah.
I was just wondering because, like, I know I have friends who are immigrants and, like, their brothers or younger sisters who are trying to get into college, so I can pass information on.
Yeah, there's like at Fresno State, I know a lot of them do have like EOP.
Mm-hmm.
That's a big one too. And then there's, I'm trying to remember their names right now. There's camp like at Fresno State. So there's a lot of like different migrant programs. So if they're identified throughout like undergrad as well, or like high school, then, they could just continue on with those also.
Okay.
Mm-hmm.
Thank you.
Welcome.
Thank you, Jasmine and Brianna for that.
What's your name? Oh.
Well, thank you all. Oh, this is Kevin. He woke up from a nap.
Cute.
But yeah, I think that concludes it. So thank you again, Liz. I'll be in touch if we need anything else from you, but I think
yeah. Okay, cool.
Yeah,
and that wraps up your questions. Yeah.
Oh, yeah. Thank you for answering them too.
Thank you so much.
Thank you. We'll be in touch.
Yes, we will. Well, bye everybody.
Bye.
Bye.